What would drive people to build an entire civilization on water? Imagine standing in the year 452 AD watching your world crumble as ruthless invaders tear through everything you've ever known. The Western Roman Empire, once the greatest power on earth, is collapsing under the weight of barbarian invasions and Attila the Huns. Armies are sweeping through northern Italy like a plague, leaving nothing but ash and destruction in their wake. Thousands of terrified refugees found themselves with an impossible choice: stay and face certain death, or flee to a place so inhospitable that no army would follow them there. They chose a shallow lagoon dotted with muddy marshes, islands of soft clay that could barely support a person's S-weight, let alone a city. These desperate souls had no idea they were about to create one of history's most extraordinary engineering marvels, a floating metropolis that would become the wealthiest trading empire of the medieval world. Against impossible odds, these refugees would transform swampland into Venice, proving that human ingenuity can triumph over nature's harshest challenges when survival demands nothing less than genius. The refugees faced a challenge that seemed insurmountable from the very beginning. The islands they fled to were essentially swamp patches of waterlogged clay, so soft that walking across them was treacherous. Traditional construction methods were completely useless here. You could simply dig a foundation and start building when the ground itself was little more than mud and water. The solution they developed was nothing short of brilliant, though it required backbreaking labor and an understanding of engineering that was centuries ahead of its time. Venetian builders journeyed to the forests of Croatia and Slovenia, harvesting thousands of timber piles from oak, larch, and alder trees selected for their density and water resistance. Workers hammered these wooden piles approximately 5 meters deep into the soft clay until they struck a harder layer called caranta. By driving the piles so close together, they compressed the surrounding clay, forcing water out and transforming soupy mud into solid foundation. The wooden piles, completely submerged and sealed from oxygen, never rotted. Scientists examining Venice today find timber foundations over 1,500 years old in nearly perfect condition. Once stable foundations were established, the Venetians faced another unique challenge. How do you build structures that won't crack and crumble when the ground beneath them is constantly shifting with the tides? After catastrophic fires destroyed many early wooden structures, they transitioned to brick construction. But even brick buildings required revolutionary techniques to survive in such an unstable environment. Venetian architects developed something that sounds counterintuitive. They made their buildings flexible rather than rigid, allowing them to move with the ground instead of fighting against it. Rather than using rigid cement which would crack under constant movement, they employed lime mortar that could bend and compress without breaking. Inner walls were built in a crisscross lattice pattern functioning like a trellis, allowing entire structures to flex as foundations shifted beneath them. The beautiful stone facades were the heaviest parts, pinned to floors using iron rods to prevent them from toppling into canals. Height restrictions limited buildings to 3 stories maximum, creating Venice's distinctive horizontal skyline. These were arbitrary rules but survival necessities in a city floating on wooden stakes driven into mud. For nearly 5 centuries, Venice existed as separate island communities with no permanent connections between them. Residents traveled everywhere by boat, navigating narrow channels, separating settlements. While this worked for small populations, it became increasingly impractical as Venice grew into a major commercial center with merchants, goods and money flowing through in ever greater volumes. Venetian leaders realized that connecting islands with permanent bridges would revolutionize trade and commerce, transforming scattered settlements into a unified economic powerhouse. The Rialto Bridge, completed in the late 16th century, stands as the crowning achievement of this vision. Builders drove more than 12,000 timber piles into both banks of the Grand Canal to support approximately 10,000 tons of Istrian stone shaped into a single graceful arch. This wasn't merely functional infrastructure, it was a declaration of Venice's dominance over the commercial world, creating the main artery to the Rialto market where merchants conducted business worth millions. Following this success, stone bridges appeared throughout the city, transforming Venice from scattered archipelago into compact urban center where goods and people flowed seamlessly through every district. Here's a paradox that must have seemed like divine mockery. Venetians lived surrounded by water on all sides, yet they were dying of thirst. The lagoon's water was brackish, a mixture of seawater and river outflow that was completely undrinkable. With no natural springs, rivers, or groundwater to tap, Venice initially depended on boats bringing fresh water from the mainland. By the 14th century, Venice's population had exploded to approximately 170,000 people, making it one of the world's largest cities, and the boat delivery system simply couldn't keep pace with demand. Venetian engineers developed a solution so clever it's still studied in modern civil engineering courses. They transformed public squares into massive rainwater collection systems by excavating enormous underground chambers lined with thick clay for waterproofing. These spaces were filled with carefully layered sand and stones acting as natural filters, while square surfaces were repaved with tiles channeling rainwater toward corner drains. Even building roofs were fitted with gutters, directing rainfall onto squares and into the filtration system below. Venice became one giant rainwater harvesting machine, with over 600 wells throughout the city supplying clean, filtered water that kept the population thriving. As Venice's population swelled and buildings packed tightly onto limited island space, the city faced another crisis threatening to make it uninhabitable: waste disposal. For centuries, residents had simply thrown garbage, human waste, and refuse out of windows, following common European practice. Those near canals could toss waste directly into water, but thousands lived in island interiors far from any canal. The result was horrific streets filled with rotting food and human excrement, creating unbearable stench and serious health hazards that turned sections of magnificent Venice into disease-ridden slums. In the 16th century, Venetian engineers designed an underground network of tunnels connecting every building, collecting all waste and channeling it toward canals. The genius was untold collection. It was using the lagoon's natural tidal movements to flush the city clean twice daily. When tide receded, solid waste settled in tunnels while liquids drained into canals. When tide rose, seawater flooded back through the system, scouring out accumulated solids and carrying everything into the lagoon. The high salt content acted as natural disinfectant, and within years, Venice's streets became some of the cleanest in Europe. What the Venetians accomplished remains almost incomprehensible even by today's standards. They built a thriving metropolis of over 100,000 people on foundations that shouldn't exist, developed civil engineering solutions that wouldn't be matched for centuries, and created a trading empire dominating global commerce for nearly a millennium. By the height of Venice's power in the 15th century, this impossible city controlled trade routes from Western Europe to China, accumulated wealth making other kingdoms envious, and produced artistic and architectural masterpieces still drawing millions of visitors annually. Yet Venice's remarkable engineering came with costs the original builders couldn't foresee. The wooden pile foundations, incredibly durable when submerged, are vulnerable to any water level drop, exposing them to air and rot. Modern industrial activities have pumped so much groundwater that Venice has subsided approximately 23 centimeters over the past century, a small number with enormous consequences when combined with rising sea levels from climate change. The MOS project, a $7 billion system of massive movable barriers, represents humanity's desperate attempt to save the city from drowning, as high tides now occur monthly rather than yearly. Standing in St. Mark's Square today, surrounded by architectural marvels and endless gondola flows through canals, it's easy to forget the audacious impossibility of Venice's existence. What started as desperate refugees fleeing for their lives became a civilization that rewrote the rules of engineering, architecture, and urban planning. They didn't have computers to model structural loads, sophisticated materials, science, or even basic calculus. They solved problems still challenging modern engineers. The compressed clay foundations, flexible building techniques, and tidal waste management each represent leaps of engineering insight born from necessity and brilliance in equal measure. We hope you've enjoyed this journey through Venice's remarkable story. If you found this fascinating, please subscribe to the World Documentaries, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you visited Venice, or is it on your bucket list? What other incredible feats of engineering and human determination would you like us to explore? Join our community of curious minds as we continue uncovering the extraordinary stories behind our world's most remarkable places. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember that the impossible is often just the difficult waiting for someone brave enough to try.